I thought my family loved me unconditionally. Turns out their love came with a price tag I couldn't afford to pay. My own family just staged an intervention to disown me for the good of the family. But they had no idea what was coming. For years, they treated me like the family failure. No college degree, no corporate job, just working odd jobs while my siblings became doctors and lawyers. What they didn't know was that those odd jobs were actually covering up a business empire worth millions. Tonight, they'd discover that their disappointment daughter was about to change everything they thought they knew. By the end of this story, my family would be begging for forgiveness. But it would be too late. The Harris family Christmas photo from last year still sits on my mother's mantelpiece, a perfect tableau of American success. There's my father, Dr. Richard Harris, in his crisp navy suit, the kind of distinguished look that screams respected cardiac surgeon. Mom, Patricia Harris Esquire, stands beside him in elegant burgundy, her law firm partnership ring catching the professional photographer's light just right. My brother Michael towers over everyone at 6'3", his engineering firm's company car keys visible in his pocket, always the subtle flex. Then there's my sister Jennifer, PhD in literature, wearing that understated confidence that only comes from tenure at a prestigious university. And me? I'm standing slightly apart, in a thrift store dress that I actually loved, smiling genuinely while they all wore their achievement masks. I look happy in that photo, but what you can't see is how the conversation went right before the camera clicked. "Stephanie, honey, maybe stand a little closer to Jennifer," Mom had suggested, her voice carrying that careful tone she uses when she's trying not to hurt my feelings. "And maybe angle yourself so the light hits you better." Translation: hide the fact that your dress cost $28 while Jennifer's cost $300. Our family dinners were legendary in our suburban Connecticut neighborhood. The Harris house, with its perfect colonial architecture and meticulously maintained garden, hosted gatherings that looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. Dad would carve the organic, free-range whatever we were eating while discussing his latest surgical innovation. Mom would seamlessly weave conversations about her recent courtroom victories. Michael would chime in about the bridges his firm was designing, and Jennifer would drop casual references to her published papers. Then they'd turn to me with those expectant, slightly worried smiles. "So, Stephanie, how's work going?" "Good," I'd say, because what else could I say? That I spent my morning walking Mrs. Henderson's 3 rescue dogs through Central Park, my afternoon house-sitting for a tech entrepreneur's penthouse on the Upper East Side, and my evening delivering specialty coffee to a cryptocurrency trader who tipped in $100 bills. They wouldn't understand that these weren't just jobs. They were carefully curated pieces of something much bigger. The pattern was always the same. After dinner, they'd retreat to Dad's study for what they called family planning sessions, but I called worry circles. I could hear their muffled voices through the heavy oak door, snippets of concern floating down the hallway. "She's 32, Richard. 32 and still doing..." "What exactly?" Patricia's right. The dog walking thing was cute when she was 25, but now, maybe we need to be more direct. She's clearly struggling but too proud to ask for help. Should we stage an intervention? I'd learned to time my departures perfectly, slipping out the back door before they emerged with their concerned expressions and gentle suggestions about career opportunities they'd found for me. The irony was delicious. Here they were, planning my rescue mission, while I was fielding calls from clients whose net worth exceeded their annual salaries. My phone would buzz constantly during these family gatherings. Text messages I'd quickly silence. "Stephanie, the Rothschild account needs Wednesday's delivery moved to Thursday. Same rate applies." Marcus, "Emergency house sit request. Upper West Side penthouse. Owner flying to Monaco. $500 night for 2 weeks. You available?" Elite concierge, "Your crypto client doubled his standing order. That's $2K in tips this month alone. Nice work." Sarah, I'd developed an art form of managing my real life while playing the role they'd assigned me. When Dad cornered me about health insurance, I didn't mention that my business carried a platinum plan that covered things his hospital policy couldn't touch. When Mom worried about my retirement planning, I didn't explain that my investment portfolio was outperforming her law firm's pension fund. When Michael offered to put in a good word at his engineering company for an entry-level position, I didn't laugh at the fact that his starting salary suggestion was less than I made in a single month. The most painful part wasn't their condescension, it was their genuine love mixed with complete blindness. They created elaborate theories about my life that were so far from reality they belonged in fiction. I was either secretly struggling with depression, hiding a gambling addiction, or maybe even involved in something illegal. The possibility that I might be successful, just not in a way they recognized, never crossed their minds. Jennifer was the worst. As the family intellectual, she'd appointed herself my unofficial therapist. "Stephanie," she'd say, using that gentle voice reserved for trauma victims and small children, "I've been reading about quarter-life crises extending into the 30s. It's totally normal to feel lost." Lost. If she only knew that while she was publishing papers about 18th century feminist literature, I was building relationships with Manhattan's elite that opened doors she couldn't imagine existed. The tipping point came during Michael's birthday dinner last spring. The whole family was there, plus his fiancée Amanda, who fit seamlessly into our success-obsessed dynamic with her corporate law background. The conversation inevitably turned to career milestones and future plans. "We're thinking of buying in Westchester," Michael announced, his arm around Amanda. "Finally ready to settle down properly." "That's wonderful, honey," Mom beamed. "The housing market is perfect for young professionals right now." "Well, established professionals," Dad corrected with a chuckle. "Takes a solid income to afford anything decent in Westchester these days." The comment hung in the air like smoke. Everyone's eyes briefly flicked to me, then away. The message was clear. This conversation wasn't for me. I was still in the figuring it out category, decades away from house buying discussions. "What about you, Stephanie?" Amanda asked, probably trying to be inclusive. "Any thoughts about settling down? Maybe finding something more stable?" Before I could answer, Jennifer jumped in with her rescue mission voice. "Stephanie's exploring her options. Not everyone follows the traditional path, and that's totally okay." The way she said it, like she was defending my right to be a colorful failure, made something snap inside me. But instead of exploding, I smiled and excused myself to take a phone call. Outside on the terrace, I listened to Marcus from Elite Concierge explain that one of our celebrity clients wanted to expand our pet services to include their vacation homes in the Hamptons and Martha's Vineyard. The contract he was describing would gross more than Michael's annual salary. When I returned to the dining room, they were deep in conversation about investment strategies and retirement planning. I sat quietly, listening to my family debate financial decisions that I could have solved with a single month's earnings. The surreal nature of it all, being financially lectured by people who earned less than my side businesses, would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. That night marked the beginning of their escalation. Within weeks, I started receiving helpful texts about job openings, forwarded LinkedIn posts about career changes, and invitations to coffee dates that were obviously ambushes designed to discuss my situation. Mom started calling twice a week instead of twice a month. "Just checking in, sweetheart. How are you feeling? Really feeling?" Dad began making casual references to people he knew who could help me transition into something more sustainable. Michael started sending me articles about adult children living with their parents, apparently missing the fact that I lived in my own apartment and had never asked them for money. Jennifer escalated to full psychological analysis mode, sending me books about finding your purpose and overcoming career paralysis. The family group chat, once filled with casual updates and shared memes, became a careful dance around the Stephanie-shaped elephant in the room. They'd share their achievements and milestones, then add generic questions clearly designed to make me feel included without highlighting what they saw as my lack of comparable success. The intervention itself was planned with the precision of a military operation. I should have seen it coming when Mom invited me for what she called a casual family dinner on a Tuesday night. We never did casual Tuesday dinners, but I was genuinely curious about what they'd orchestrated, so I showed up in my favorite jeans and a sweater that cost more than they'd guess. carrying the secret knowledge of a day that had netted me 4 figures in revenue. I walked into an ambush disguised as love. They were all there, arranged in the living room like a tribunal of concern. Mom and Dad on the main sofa, Jennifer in the armchair with her therapist posture, Michael standing by the fireplace like he was delivering a business presentation. The coffee table held a folder, never a good sign in the Harris household. "Stephanie, honey, sit down," Mom said, patting the space between her and Dad. "We want to talk to you." The folder, it turned out, contained printouts, job listings from various companies, brochures for community colleges offering career transition programs, and what looked suspiciously like applications for graduate school programs with late admission deadlines. "We've been thinking," Dad began, using his doctor voice, calm, authoritative, designed to comfort patients receiving difficult diagnoses. "We love you, and we want what's best for you." "Which is why we think it's time for some changes," Jennifer added, leaning forward with her practiced therapy lean. "We've found some amazing opportunities that could really help you build a foundation." Michael cleared his throat, pulling out his phone. "I've actually been talking to some people at work. There's an entry-level position in our administrative department. Great benefits, room for growth, and they're willing to train someone without a traditional background." The word traditional landed like a slap. Because that's what this was really about, my refusal to follow their script for success. "The thing is," Mom continued, her voice getting that careful walking on eggshells quality, "we're worried about your future. What happens in 10 years, 20 years? You can't walk dogs forever, sweetie." "And the house-sitting thing," Dad added. "That's not exactly a career path with security or advancement opportunities." I sat there, listening to them dissect my life like it was a failed experiment, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, something worse. Disappointment, because I'd realized that they would never see me clearly. They were so invested in their version of my story, the struggling younger daughter who needed saving, that they'd become blind to any evidence that contradicted it. "We've made some decisions," Jennifer announced, apparently elected as the family spokesperson. "We think you need a structured environment to help you transition into something more sustainable. Starting with moving back home," Mom added quickly. "Just temporarily while you get on your feet properly. And we've enrolled you in a career counseling program," Michael said, consulting his phone again. "It's specifically designed for people who are, finding their direction later in life." The euphemisms were killing me. Later in life? Finding direction. Getting on your feet? Each phrase a gentle knife, cutting away at the person I actually was to fit the shape of who they needed me to be. "The bottom line," Dad said, assuming his position as family patriarch, "is that we love you too much to watch you waste your potential. Sometimes families have to make tough decisions." And then came the ultimatum, delivered with all the warmth of a corporate restructuring announcement. "Either you accept our help and start making real changes," Jennifer said, her voice taking on that cruel-to-be-kind tone that therapists use when they think they're delivering necessary truth, "or we can't continue enabling what's clearly become a destructive pattern." The word enabling hung in the air like poison gas. Enabling what? My independence? My success? My refusal to let them define my worth? "We're cutting you off," Michael said bluntly, apparently tired of dancing around the edges. "No more family events, no more financial assistance, no more pretending everything is fine when it's clearly not. For the good of the family," Mom added, tears in her eyes but resolution in her voice. "Sometimes you have to let people hit bottom before they can rebuild." I looked around the room at these people who had raised me, educated me, claimed to love me unconditionally, and I realized that their love was the most conditional thing in my life. It was contingent on me being small enough, struggling enough, needy enough to fit their narrative of family dynamics. For a moment, I considered telling them everything, pulling out my phone and showing them the business accounts, the client testimonials, the investment portfolios. I imagined their faces when they realized that their struggling daughter had built something they couldn't even comprehend. But then I looked at Jennifer's earnest therapist face, at Michael's corporate problem-solver stance, at Mom and Dad's desperate parental concern, and I realized something liberating. I didn't owe them the truth. They had judged me based on their limited understanding of success, found me wanting, and pronounced sentence. They had made their choice. Now I could make mine. I stood up slowly, smoothing down my jeans that cost more than the career counseling program they'd signed me up for without asking. I looked at each of them, memorizing their faces in this moment when they thought they were saving me from myself. "I understand," I said quietly. "You've made your position clear." "Stephanie, we're doing this because we love you," Mom said, reaching for my hand. I stepped back, not in anger, but in clarity. "I know you think you are." And then I walked out of the house where I'd grown up, carrying the knowledge that my family had just freed me from the last obligation I felt to protect their feelings about my choices. They thought they were cutting me off. They had no idea they'd just cut themselves off from the most successful person in the room. The drive home from my family's intervention felt like emerging from an alternate reality. I sat in my Tesla Model S, a car they'd never seen because I always took Ubers to family events to maintain their illusion of my financial struggles, and let the weight of what had just happened settle over me. They'd officially disowned me for the good of the family, completely unaware that they'd just severed ties with someone who could buy and sell their precious suburban lifestyle without blinking. My phone buzzed with the familiar symphony of my actual life. 3 missed calls from Marcus at Elite Concierge, 2 texts from high-net-worth clients, and an email notification from my investment advisor. While my family was staging their intervention to save me from my destructive pattern, my businesses had generated more revenue in that single evening than Dad made in his last surgery. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I pulled into the parking garage of my downtown loft, a space that cost more per month than most people's salaries, and finally allowed myself to feel the full scope of what my family had just done. Not the financial implications, obviously. I'd been financially independent from them for years. It was the emotional amputation that stung. They'd decided I was a liability to their perfect family image and cut me loose with the surgical precision Dad used in his operating room. But as I rode the elevator to my floor, something shifted inside me. The hurt began transforming into something else. Clarity. For 5 years, I'd been protecting their feelings by hiding my success, playing the role of the struggling younger daughter so they could feel important, needed, superior. I'd been enabling their need to see themselves as the successful ones by making myself small. That performance was over. My loft opened up before me like a sanctuary I'd forgotten I owned. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, minimalist furniture that cost more than most people's cars, original artwork I'd acquired through connections my family couldn't imagine. This wasn't the apartment of someone who was finding her direction later in life. This was the home of someone who'd found her direction years ago and built an empire around it. I kicked off my shoes and opened my laptop, ready to dive into the world they'd never bothered to understand. My business dashboard lit up with numbers that would make my brother's engineering salary look like pocket change. The pet concierge service alone was pulling in $400K annually, and that was just the beginning. It had started innocently enough 5 years ago. I was walking Mrs. Henderson's dogs because I genuinely loved animals and needed flexible work while I figured things out. But Mrs. Henderson wasn't just any dog owner. She was the wife of a hedge fund manager who lived in a $15 million penthouse. When she mentioned to her friends that she'd found the most reliable, trustworthy pet sitter in the city, those friends happened to include CEOs, celebrities, and old money families who valued discretion above everything else. Within 6 months, I wasn't just walking dogs. I was managing the complete care of animals whose monthly grooming budgets exceeded most people's rent. Pets who flew private jets, had personal trainers, and wore jewelry that required insurance policies. The wealthy weren't just buying pet care, they were buying peace of mind from someone who understood their world without judgment. That's when I realized something my family, with all their traditional education and corporate thinking, had missed entirely. The ultra-wealthy don't want service providers who try to impress them with credentials. They want people who can seamlessly integrate into their lives without drama, gossip, or social climbing. They want invisible excellence. So I became invisible excellent. The house sitting evolved the same way. When Mrs. Henderson's hedge fund manager husband needed someone to maintain their Hamptons estate during off-season, he didn't want a property management company with uniforms and clipboards. He wanted someone who could live in a $20 million house like they belonged there, someone who understood that the art on the walls was worth more than most people's net worth, someone who could handle unexpected situations with discretion and intelligence. I became that person. Within 2 years, I was managing properties that appeared in Architectural Digest, coordinating with staff who'd worked for royal families, and maintaining homes that served as backdrop for business deals worth hundreds of millions. My clients didn't just trust me with their property. They trusted me with their privacy, their security, their most intimate spaces. The delivery service was the natural evolution. When your clients are cryptocurrency traders who don't trust traditional courier services with transactions worth millions, when they need someone who can move sensitive documents between penthouses and private jets without asking questions, when they require a person who can navigate their world without leaving digital footprints, you become that person too. I wasn't just delivering coffee and documents. I was facilitating deals, carrying information, serving as a secure link in chains of transactions that moved global markets. My clients paid premium rates not just for delivery, but for absolute reliability and discretion. By year 3, I had formalized everything into a network of LLCs that provided what I called lifestyle concierge services for discerning clients. Pet care, property management, secure courier services, and what the contracts diplomatically termed specialized assistance for unique requirements. My client list read like a who's who of Manhattan's power structure: tech entrepreneurs who'd sold companies for billions, financial titans who moved markets with single phone calls, entertainment moguls whose latest projects shaped global culture, old money families whose names appeared on museum wings and university buildings. They paid me not just for services, but for access to a lifestyle management system that understood their world completely. When a client's $2 million racehorse needed emergency veterinary care at 3 a.m., I had the connections to make it happen seamlessly. When another client's teenage daughter crashed her Ferrari in the Hamptons and needed the situation handled without media attention, I knew exactly who to call. When a cryptocurrency billionaire needed to move $50 million in assets across 3 countries within 24 hours, I facilitated the human connections that made it possible. The money followed naturally. When you're providing irreplaceable services to people for whom money is no object, pricing becomes almost irrelevant. My monthly retainers from core clients exceeded what most families made in a year. Individual projects often generated more in a week than my siblings made in months. But the real wealth came from proximity. When you're trusted by billionaires, you hear things. Investment opportunities that aren't advertised to the general public. Real estate deals that happen in private conversations before they hit the market. Cryptocurrency plays that come directly from the people creating the technology. I'd parlayed that insider knowledge, carefully, legally, ethically, into investment returns that dwarfed anything my parents' financial advisors could achieve. My portfolio included positions in companies before they went public, real estate in markets before they exploded, and alternative investments that required connections to access. The numbers on my screen told the story my family had never bothered to learn. Annual revenue, $2.3 million. Investment portfolio, $8.7 million. Real estate holdings, $4.2 million. Liquid assets, $1.8 million. Total net worth, just over $17 million. At 32, I had achieved more financial success than my entire family combined. While they were worried about my career trajectory, I was building generational wealth through methods they couldn't comprehend because they'd never moved in circles where such opportunities existed. The beautiful part wasn't just the money, it was the freedom. Freedom from their expectations, their definitions of success, their need to see me struggle so they could feel superior. Tonight's intervention had actually been a gift. They'd cut the last emotional strings that kept me tethered to their limitations. My phone rang, interrupting my financial review. Marcus from Elite Concierge calling about tomorrow's high-priority assignments. Stephanie, I know it's late, but we just got a request that's perfect for you. Cryptocurrency client needs someone to coordinate a private auction for rare artworks. It's happening at a penthouse in Tribeca, very exclusive, very discreet. The commission alone is worth more than most people make in 6 months. Send me the details, I said, already mentally shifting into business mode. What's the timeline? 2 weeks to coordinate everything. Client specifically requested you because of your track record with high-stakes situations. He's willing to pay triple your usual rate because of the sensitivity involved. Triple rate for a 2-week project meant roughly $150,000, more than Michael made in a year at his engineering firm, for a job my family would probably classify as event planning if they bothered to understand it at all. I'll take it, I said. Email me the contract tonight. After hanging up, I opened a bottle of wine that cost more than the career counseling program my family had signed me up for without asking. As I sipped it, looking out at the city lights that represented millions of people pursuing their own versions of success, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete authenticity. No more hiding, no more playing small, no more protecting their feelings about my choices. Tomorrow, I would start living my actual life publicly. 3 weeks after the intervention, I was featured on the cover of Manhattan Business Weekly as Entrepreneur of the Year Under 35. The article, titled The Invisible Empire: How One Woman Built a Multi-million-dollar Business Serving Manhattan's Elite, included photos of me in my loft, quotes from unnamed clients praising my services, and a financial breakdown that made my success impossible to ignore. The journalist had reached out after hearing about my business through her own wealthy connections. She'd been fascinated by the concept of invisible entrepreneurship, building massive success in spaces that don't traditionally get media attention because the clients value privacy above publicity. The article explained how I'd identified an underserved market among ultra-high net worth individuals who needed services that combined luxury with absolute discretion. It detailed how my business model had evolved from simple pet care to comprehensive lifestyle management for clients whose needs extended far beyond traditional service categories. Most importantly, it included verified financial information, revenue figures, growth percentages, client retention rates, all the metrics that proved I wasn't just successful but extraordinarily successful by any reasonable standard. I found out my family had seen the article because Jennifer called me the morning it hit newsstands. For the first time in weeks, my phone showed an incoming call from a Harris family member. "Stephanie?" Her voice sounded strange, uncertain. The article..." "Hello, Jennifer," I said calmly, not making it easy for her. "We didn't know. We had no idea. The things they're saying about your business, the numbers they're reporting, are all accurate," I finished for her. "Is there something specific you needed?" The pause stretched so long I wondered if she'd hung up. Finally, "Mom and Dad want to talk to you. We all do. We made a mistake." "Yes," I agreed. "You did." "Can you come over? Can we fix this?" I looked around my loft, at the life I'd built while they worried about my direction, at the success I'd achieved while they planned my rescue. "I don't think there's anything to fix, Jennifer. You made your position very clear 3 weeks ago." "But we didn't understand. If you had known what? You would have treated me with respect. You would have asked questions instead of making assumptions. You would have seen me as capable instead of broken." Her silence answered everything. "The problem wasn't that you didn't know about my business," I continued. "The problem was that you decided I was a failure without bothering to learn anything about my actual life. You created a story about who I was and what I needed, then staged an intervention to force me into your narrative." "Stephanie, please. We love you." "I know you think you do, but love doesn't try to shrink people. Love doesn't stage interventions to fix things that aren't broken. Love doesn't cut people off for refusing to live the life you think they should live." After Jennifer hung up, the calls began in earnest. Mom, Dad, Michael, all wanting to talk, to explain, to make things right. I let them go to voicemail. Their messages followed a predictable pattern: shock at the revelation of my success, embarrassment about their assumptions, and desperate attempts to rewrite the narrative of what had happened. But I wasn't interested in their revisionist history. They'd shown me who they were when they thought I was powerless. Now that they knew I had power, their sudden change of heart felt less like love and more like damage control. The real vindication came from the business community. Within days of the article's publication, I was flooded with inquiries from potential clients, partnership offers from other entrepreneurs, and invitations to speak at conferences about alternative business models. The same industry my family had dismissed as odd jobs was celebrating me as an innovator. A week later, I received an invitation to appear on Manhattan Money, the city's premier business television show. The host, Katherine Klein, was known for her penetrating interviews with successful entrepreneurs. She wanted to discuss my unconventional path to extraordinary success. I accepted. The interview was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in the Times Square studio that had hosted everyone from tech billionaires to Wall Street legends. As I sat in makeup, preparing to discuss my business on camera, I thought about how surreal it was that my family had discovered my success through a magazine article rather than through any genuine interest in my life. Katherine Klein proved to be exactly as sharp as her reputation suggested. Her questions were intelligent, probing, designed to reveal not just what I'd built, but how I'd built it. Stephanie, your business model is fascinating because it exists in spaces most people never see. Can you explain how you identified this market opportunity? I realized that ultra-high net worth individuals have needs that don't fit traditional service categories, I replied. They don't want just a dog walker. They want someone who understands that their pet's security and privacy are as important as their own. They don't want just a house sitter. They want someone who can manage properties that are works of art themselves, who can handle situations that require discretion and sophistication. And you've managed to build this while staying completely under the radar until now. Was that intentional? Absolutely. My clients value privacy above almost everything else. The moment I became someone who courted publicity or used their names for marketing, I would have lost their trust. Success in this space requires invisible excellence. Let's talk numbers, because frankly, they're impressive. You're generating revenue that exceeds what most traditional businesses achieve, and you've done it by age 32. What would you say to people who might dismiss your work as not a real business? The question hit exactly where I'd hoped it would. I'd say that real business is defined by value creation and financial results, not by whether it fits traditional categories. I've created significant value for clients who were willing to pay premium rates for that value. The financial results speak for themselves. You've mentioned that your family was initially skeptical of your career path. How do they feel about your success now? I paused, considering how to answer truthfully without destroying them publicly. I think my family, like many families, had very specific ideas about what success looks like. When someone you love doesn't fit those preconceived notions, it can be difficult to see their actual achievements. Success comes in many forms, and not all of them look like traditional career paths. The diplomatic answer felt like grace they didn't deserve, but I wasn't interested in using my moment of triumph to humiliate them. That would have made me smaller, not larger. After the interview aired, the response was overwhelming. Business schools wanted to study my model. Other entrepreneurs reached out about franchising opportunities. Investors expressed interest in funding expansion into other markets. More importantly, other people who'd been dismissed by their families for unconventional choices started reaching out. The stories were heartbreakingly similar. Talented, successful people whose achievements were invisible to family members who could only recognize traditional markers of success. I decided to do something with my platform. 6 months after my family's intervention, I launched the Invisible Success Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting entrepreneurs who were building businesses in non-traditional spaces. We provided mentorship, microloans, and most importantly, community for people whose families couldn't see their potential. The foundation's first event was a gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, an event my wealth and connections made possible, held in spaces my family had never accessed despite their professional achievements. The guest list included the clients who'd made my success possible, alongside entrepreneurs who were just beginning their own unconventional journeys. As I stood in the Temple of Dender, wearing a custom gown that cost more than my family's annual vacation budget, Addressing an audience of people who understood that success couldn't be measured only in degrees and corporate titles, I felt the completion of my transformation. I was no longer the daughter who needed saving. I was the woman who was doing the saving. The foundation's work became my new passion project. We funded everything from artisanal food businesses that served niche markets to tech startups that solved problems traditional venture capital didn't understand. Our common thread wasn't the type of business, but the type of entrepreneur, people who saw opportunities others missed, who built value in spaces others dismissed, who succeeded on their own terms rather than conforming to conventional expectations. My family eventually stopped calling. The initial flurry of contact after the magazine article faded into awkward silence. Occasionally, I'd see them at community events. Dad still commanded respect at the hospital. Mom still won cases at her firm. Michael still designed bridges. Jennifer still published papers. They maintained their image of suburban success, but something had shifted. At my cousin Sarah's wedding 6 months later, I watched them navigate conversations where people knew exactly who I was and what I'd achieved. The dynamics were fascinating. Relatives who'd once asked them how Stephanie was doing with concern now asked about my business with genuine curiosity. Their friends referenced my television interview, my foundation, my success in ways that made it impossible for my family to maintain their narrative about my struggles. I didn't attend the wedding. I was in Monaco, coordinating a private art acquisition for a client. But Sarah sent me videos of the reception. In one, I could see my parents at their table, nodding politely while someone enthusiastically described my foundation's latest initiative. Their faces wore expressions I'd never seen before, a mixture of pride they couldn't quite claim and regret they couldn't quite express. Michael posted photos from the wedding on social media, carefully cropping out moments where people discussed my absence. Jennifer shared academic articles about entrepreneurship, perhaps hoping someone would make the connection to her successful sister. Mom and Dad maintained their usual social media presence, sharing their professional achievements and family moments, but never mentioning their daughter who'd become more successful than any of them. The silence spoke volumes. They couldn't celebrate my success without acknowledging their role in trying to destroy it. They couldn't take pride in my achievements without admitting their blindness to my potential. They couldn't claim connection to my accomplishments without confronting their decision to cut me off for refusing to conform to their vision of my life. A year after the intervention, I received an unexpected package. No return address, but the handwriting was clearly Mom's. Inside was the family Christmas photo from 2 years ago, the one where I stood slightly apart in my thrift store dress, smiling genuinely while they wore their achievement masks. Along with the photo was a note. "We should have seen you more clearly. We hope someday you can forgive us for seeing what we expected, instead of what was real." I kept the photo, but I didn't respond to the note. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. Some relationships, once broken by fundamental misunderstanding, cannot be restored by simple apologies. But I wasn't bitter. Bitterness would have meant they still had power over my emotional state, and they'd lost that power the night they tried to disown me. Instead, I felt something more complex. Gratitude for the clarity their betrayal had provided. They'd forced me to stop hiding my success to protect their feelings. They'd pushed me into full authenticity by making their love conditional on my smallness. They'd given me the gift of understanding that family isn't defined by genetics or shared history, but by people who see you clearly and love you completely. My chosen family now included clients who'd become genuine friends, entrepreneurs who understood the lonely path of unconventional success, and mentees who reminded me daily that the most important thing about achieving success is using it to create opportunities for others. 2 years after the intervention, as I sat in my expanded loft, I'd bought the apartment next door and combined them into a space worthy of Architectural Digest. I received one final communication from my birth family, an invitation to Dad's retirement party with a handwritten note from Mom. "Your father is retiring after 40 years of surgery. It would mean everything to us if you could attend. We know we have no right to ask, but we hope time has helped heal what we broke." I RSVP'd my regrets, not out of spite but out of self-preservation. I'd learned that protecting your energy means being selective about which relationships deserve your attention. I'd learned that forgiveness doesn't require restoration. I'd learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the freedom to walk away from people who couldn't love you properly. On the night of Dad's retirement party, I was hosting a foundation event in my building's rooftop garden. 50 entrepreneurs whose unconventional paths had led to extraordinary success, sharing stories and strategies under the Manhattan skyline. These were my people, individuals who'd built something meaningful despite being dismissed, doubted, or disowned by those who claimed to love them. As midnight approached and the last guests departed, I stood alone on the rooftop, looking out at a city full of dreamers and builders and innovators. My phone showed dozens of messages from the evening, new business opportunities, partnership proposals, mentorship requests. Tomorrow would bring more of the same, a life filled with purpose, prosperity, and authentic connections. I thought briefly about my family, probably cleaning up after Dad's party, perhaps wondering if I'd seen the photos they'd inevitably posted online. I hoped Dad's retirement was everything he'd dreamed it would be. I hoped they'd found peace with their choices, just as I'd found peace with mine. But mostly, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. The little girl who'd stood apart in family photos had grown into a woman who stood confidently in her own success. The daughter they'd tried to save had saved herself, then used that salvation to save others. The family who disowned me for my own good had no idea that their rejection had been the making of me. They'd tried to cut me off from their version of success, never realizing they were freeing me to create my own. In the end, that was the greatest gift they'd ever given me. The understanding that their approval was never necessary for my happiness. Their acceptance never required for my worth. Their love never needed for my wholeness. I was complete exactly as I was, successful exactly as I'd chosen to be, worthy exactly because I existed, and that was worth more than all the family dinners in the world.